Thank you for coming and welcome to the Move Minneapolis Remote Work webinar. We have more than 130 participants today and a very good program. We've guests from Bozeman, Montana to North Carolina with us today. We really want to thank the Midwest chapter of the Association for Commuter Transportation for their generous program sponsorship. I'm Mary Morse Marty, Executive Director of Move Minneapolis. We're a nonprofit transportation management organization that promotes sustainable commuting in the Twin Cities. It goes without saying that these are very challenging times, and our organization is leading the charge locally to help employers implement or improve their remote work systems as a response to COVID-19. Today, we're really pleased to have Wendy Duren in the house virtually to present some remote work fundamentals and insider's tips. Wendy is Chief Operating Officer of Destination Sales and Marketing Group and a nationally recognized commute management expert. She's also a full-time teleworker who remotely and very successfully manages 18 staff across the country. We want to answer as many of your questions as we can. Please submit them at any time during the presentation by selecting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them after the presentation. You can also feel free to start running a conversation with us and each other in the chat room button. Okay, I think that's everything. We're ready to go. I'll turn it over to you, Wendy.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mary. As Mary mentioned, we've got a lot of opportunity to interact with each other. And so for the purpose of today, we're going to keep the presentation somewhat brief. We're planning on, say, 15 to 20 minutes to share some information and then allow the rest of the time for that Q&A and hopefully find some great solutions that other people want to share as well that they've had come in the meantime. So these are some of the four main elements that we're going to be talking about today, and then there's subgroups about that and the components we'll talk about as well. But I thought it would be important to talk about the obvious of why telework, right? But I think it's important when determining your company's reaction to COVID-19. It's really important to take into consideration what your local, state, and federal entities are saying and echo that in what you're practicing at your companies. Employers have the ability right now to work fully remotely, some of them, and they should take this opportunity to lead by example whenever possible. So no matter how long or short your employees end up teleworking during the situation, it is a good time to make sure that you're documenting your experience to determine how telework could work for your organization in the long term. And by long term, we're talking about this could be a longer situation than we're currently anticipating, but it could also be seen as like a pretty good pilot to determine how you could set up the situation now for how you could offer this to employees in the future if you have informal or formal telework programs that you're interested in utilizing. So having said that, it's not going to be perfect, right? And it's best to be upfront with your employees that you appreciate their assistance in advance for being patient and providing constructive feedback throughout the process if you are in the process of setting up, say, an emergency telework situation, because that will certainly help things out in the long run. So we're going to talk about 4 different components today, and those are going to cover managing logistics, some hardware software options, developing an emergency telework agreement, some of the tools that you can utilize for communication and productivity, as well as some elements that will help effectively execute your management practices. So we'll start with eligibility. We're in a new norm, so determining what eligibility is in this new situation and how emergency telework will apply to everyone will be important. Typically, in the usual circumstances, we would be assisting employers with a whole checklist of things that they would go through regarding who is and who isn't eligible. But given the current situation, this may have to be reduced to the majority or all of your employees being asked to telework. So it's important to determine if every position will be teleworking full-time, if some positions will be teleworking part-time, or if there are positions that won't be able to telework at all. And if you do have part-time remote workers, which we're considering remote workers are those who are switching between home and work offices, you'll need to be especially diligent to not cross-contaminate if they are switching workplaces. So once you've determined how many of your employees will be teleworking, you'll need to determine what equipment and software is needed to perform their duties remotely. So consider whether or not you have extra hardware on site, such as laptops that employees will be assigned and able to take home, or if employees will be asked to use what they have available at their homes. Develop plans for those who do not have equipment needed at home if necessary. Are employees also able to use iPads or even their own smartphones? And regarding internet connectivity, companies will need to determine if they will be reimbursing employees, and this is truly a company decision to be made. It's really unique. In markets that we work with, we're seeing that some companies do provide some reimbursement, but others don't if they have identified that their staff already have these uses available to them at their home. So this is a conversation that management really should be having with every employee. Having said that, any technology provided to employees should be logged and tracked in your inventory processes, just so you can keep track of where things are. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It can be as basic as just what it is and the model numbers or any other identifying data. So even through this new normal of speeding things through and making sure that we're trying to get our plans in place as quickly as possible, organizations should really maximize their telework capacity by entering into telework agreements with as many employees as possible, and your agreement could be as basic as the elements that you see on this slide. Managers should set up multiple tests with the various tools that you'll be implementing, and you'll need to identify if some of your employees have, say, really good audio opportunities from working from home, but their video might not be as great, and reflect how you're going to expect communications regarding that moving forward. Some other things good for managers to consider, especially with school closures, is if employees are having to work and provide childcare or homeschooling at this time. In a typical telework agreement, this wouldn't be allowed, but we're not in a typical time, obviously. So you might need to discuss allowing flex hours, different work shifts, or rotations regarding when people are able to be accessible. So now is truly the time to have honest conversations about when it's okay for children to be in the room and when it's not. And I know that sounds obvious, but you know, having been in the field for a while promoting telework, those type of conversations really need to happen. Another developing situation for families is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So there's legislation that's passed the House and moving into the Senate that has to do with FMLA and paid sick leave. And there's also things happening at the local state legislation here. So it's really important for HR professionals and employers to be monitoring this. So flexibility and understanding for your employees are going to go a real long way at this time. So now we'll talk a bit about the tools that you'll be able to utilize, and we'll start first with virtual meetings. So with virtual work situations, it's important to be connected, and I can't stress the importance, and you'll hear me say this a few times today, how crucial video is going to play in your plans, both to engage your employees and get into more of a routine of what this new normal is. And that's for a multitude of reasons. The obvious might be, you know, you're able to see some nonverbal communication and add some more personal style. But having people expect to be on video also gets them ready for their day and gets them camera ready. So it has more than just the obvious scenario of being able to see people's faces. So some of the tools that we're seeing people use, I've got up on the slide here. Many of you may be familiar with Microsoft Office Teams. This is a tool that can be used for chat, for video, for document collaboration. And the nice thing about this is it has a multitude of populations that you can pull in. So you can have multiple people on for a video screen call. You can have 250 people in a meeting. You could have 20 for a chat. Skype chat is also a video option, but you aren't going to see instant collaboration on that. Today we're using Zoom, which is a great video conferencing tool that can hold up to 100 participants at a free level. GoToMeeting is a LogMeIn product, and that is a web-hosted online meeting, phone, and video conference option. Some other things that get more social engagement with your teams might be Slack, which is a chat room for your whole company. That does also offer sharing capabilities, or even Yammer, which again is a MS Office inclusive, but you can think of Yammer as a social technology style platform for your company. So it provides more of a relaxed, informal feel to share information. And you shouldn't discount the tools that most people have today, which would be if they have iPhones or Androids. With iPhones, you can merge up to 5 calls at a time for meetings, and with Androids, you can merge up to 3. And then there's also some free conference call options like freeconferencecall.com, where you can have up to 5 participants, or even Google Hangouts. Some other collaborative tools are how you're going to be able to share your files and documents, and I've got a few of those on the screen here. OneDrive and SharePoint is an MS Office offering, and now is really a good time for your teams to be utilizing this. There's a lot of apps that go with this that are supported, and there's also a lot of great tutorials. So it could also be an opportunity for your employees to receive some professional development by taking tutorials on how they can utilize a lot of those offerings better. Dropbox has been around quite a bit longer. Most people are familiar with that. It's free cloud-based file hosting for sharing. And then Google Drive is also has free components. It's cloud-based, but you can also be live editing with each other with documents. Some other tools that have come into the workplace for some people that have been very effective have to do with productivity. And managers will want to be setting up set times to be meeting with staff, and you'll probably be feeling like you're over-communicating. But it's crucial to make sure that you're touching base with people potentially a lot more than you had when you were in a physical office situation. So there's a variety of project tools, and many of these are at no or low cost, depending on your needs. And they're going to allow you to keep track of your individual employees and your team's productivity kind of behind the scenes without having to, say, be interrupting people's day to try to figure things out. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is Asana. This is one that we're using internally at our office. It's a project management system that organizes your tasks, your meeting notes, and files into specific projects to keep everyone on track. So this system has free and paid versions, and it is typically best for large or growing organizations where you have different teams that are working on multiple projects simultaneously. So another one that's similar to this is Trello. They're also a project management system similar to Asana. They do have a free version. They're best for small businesses that already have clear processes in place. And another one is I've Done This, which is a team daily progress tracking software. So you can easily check in on what team members have been completing during their work days and what still needs to have more attention brought to it. Shifting gears a little bit with the productivity, there's, I'm sure, some questions that have come up that have to do with operations, and I wanted to share with you something that we're using in our office too called HubStaff. And this is a free and low-cost paid plan that allows for timesheet management, reporting on time spent on particular projects if you need to track that, employee time off requests, and productivity trading. And you can even have some random screen grabs with this. So this is a tool that will allow people to, say, do those operational management with their employees as well. So talking with Mary and Becky at Move Minneapolis, we were chatting, and as Mary had mentioned on the front end here, I've been remote working for 5 years now, since 2015, and I do manage a team of 18 people, as well as on the executive team for our organization. And I wanted to just kind of share with you then what my experience is with teleworking. And it's been interesting. This shot is a picture of some of my team after we completed a commute challenge. And I represented the telework team that technically wins every year, but it's really hard to beat the non-commute. But here's a glimpse into my day. So I get camera ready every day from my hair to my feet. I know some people are like, oh, you can wear jammies on the bottom and whatever on top, but I really just I get dressed in full for the day. It makes me stay in a routine. I feel more grounded. And I truly believe that work is something I do. It's not a place I go, and it helps me keep in that frame of mind. I have a space that I'm able to utilize only for teleworking. Not everyone has that ability, but it's important to be able to separate your work from your personal. And especially as people are transitioning, know that they're able to close down work and just leave that aside for the day when the day is done. I start my day by opening some of the tools that we talked about today. I open up Teams to see if I've got any communications from staff who might be out or need something urgent. And then I open up Asana to see how our projects are doing, and that's also where I hold my task list. So I kind of prep my day that way before I open up my email. So I'm using a lot of these productivity tools before I open up, say, the traditional email services. I make a habit of holding all my meetings on video, whether it be my weekly one-on-ones with my staff or my larger team meetings. We also use GoToMeeting when it's a larger group. And some tips about when you are on video, you need to keep a few things in mind. One is lighting, so try not to sit with your back to a window because it makes it really difficult for participants to see you. And it's also beneficial to have a light that's centered behind your webcam to provide you with some ambient light. There are other things you can purchase, but I haven't found them to be necessary in the 5 years I've been doing this. And it's also important to think about what is behind you that is distracting. I typically use a blank background with where I sit, and that's just my preference. Another thing to keep in mind is about your children or animals at home, and mitigate the best you can, but it doesn't hurt if you think you're going to have some interruptions to share some of that information ahead of time in your meetings. And as we're doing today, I also recommend when you're in a larger meeting with your teams or larger employee groups that you mute when you're not talking. And it's important to keep a chat window open for larger meetings so people feel like they can raise their hand if they have a question or comment. Otherwise, you're going to end up talking over each other a lot. So moving along to some of the other tools that we utilize that are cloud and app-based, our customer relationship management is all cloud and app-based, and all of our reporting is also, so we're able to collaborate all on that as well virtually. And truth be told, some days I'm on video for well over half of my day. And so when that happens, I make sure to get up, grab water, try to eat healthy snacks. If I don't have time for a quick walk around the block, and I usually try to take my dog with me on that to get some of her energy out, I try to get fresh air by at least walking to the mailbox slowly, taking deep breaths, or filling my bird feeders, which is needed year-round, which is important in Minnesota to get out there and get that fresh air. So moving along to effective management tools and ideas here, it's really important to communicate openly and address concerns and needs in advance of your employees. In this current new normal, you will inevitably have managers that could use training on how to manage telework employees or employees that need telework training as well. So anticipate these challenges across your organization and expect that people are going to need help. As I mentioned earlier, it's really better to be over-communicating than under-communicating at this time. And managers may need to review key performance metrics with staff and how they'll evaluate performance, especially if we're entering into a lengthy period of continuous telework. So your employees will need to know how you'd like to be communicated with and how they want to communicate with you. And you'll need to develop plans to keep communicating with them ongoing. So in my experience, I do have employees that are chatting with me on Teams a lot throughout the day. They're just checking in with me, seeing if I have some ideas for them, or just, kind of that normal interaction that you might have in an office. It's kind of replicated with chat. But I do have some other team members who really just like saving their communications for me on our weekly video meeting, and that's totally fine. I only hold audio meetings if technology isn't available or disrupted, or it is the preference of who I am managing up to. So my entire team knows that my expectations for anybody I'm managing down to is that we will be on video. So it's important to keep business as usual, stick to a routine. Your employee's usual commute and schedule is completely uprooted, but following a new routine while in familiar surroundings can be very calming, especially when things are changing around them. So stress the importance for employees to eat well, take breaks, check in with them while you're assessing their productivity. Screen fatigue and tech neck, as we've heard, is a real thing. And the transition may take a little longer for some employees. So flexibility, empathy, and communication are key and will be helping you immensely through this process. So I'll turn it over to Mary now to share with you some great resources that are available here locally.
Thank you, Wendy. We want to talk about what's going on here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. One thing is the TMO network, the Transportation Management Network. There's Move Minneapolis, Move Minnesota, Anoka County Commuter Services, and of course Metro Transit offers a TMO, but the one that probably does the most with telework is Commuter Services. And there are partners to the south. It's more or less the 494 corridor. They have a really well-developed telework consulting program, and they offer these services to businesses in their region at no cost. As far as Move Minneapolis, we're very flexible, and we're moving pretty much every day to look for the best telework resources and communications that we can find. Right now, we're aggregating useful telework materials and making them available on our website. And if you haven't been there, let me give you the address. It's www.moveminneapolis.org. We're also gathering remote work policies. And what we'd like to do with those is scrub them of your company identity and share those with the community. We're coming up with a document that provides kind of a vast array of remote work policies, because it isn't, as Wendy said, it's not one size fits all. We are really trying to meet the needs of very small businesses, large organizations, nonprofits, institutions. Everybody has a slightly different workflow and culture, so I think we can meet those needs, but we would really appreciate your help. So if your company or organization is willing to contribute to this community resource, please let us know. You can leave us a note via the chat button below, or you can call us or contact us later. We would love to hear from you. And again, we'll keep that information private if you are not interested in sharing publicly. But at this point, I think we have to all agree we're all in this together. And the most we can do for each other is to share what we know. So if more trainings, I guess the last thing I'll say is more trainings like this one would be useful, just let us know. So this is a quote, as you can see from our mayor. We're very lucky in the Twin Cities to have a very forward-thinking community, and we feel safe and strong with folks like this. Here's what I want to say at the very end. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, audience members. We're really, really grateful for your commitment to a healthy community. We'll be posting this webinar to our website, and we would love for you to share it with your networks. Now I would like to ask you if you have any questions. We had one question, one official question in our Q&A button, and I'd like to call your attention to that, again, at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A button, you can click on that and ask any question you like, and we will get to it. One question that came in was, will this webinar be available to us? And yes, a recording is being made, and it will be posted to the moveminneapolis.org website. I have some questions, and my colleague, Becky, who I want to thank also, who's running tech, came up with a couple of good questions, because we're always internally trying to learn more. This is an interesting one. What's a great tip for managing staff that's been moving from observation-based management to discovery-based management? And what's that really mean, Wendy?
So certainly, if I follow your question, Mary, I think what we're talking about is the difference between people being in place and assuming that they're delivering, and then actually seeing deliverables. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what's important, and this is just good management practice, but it's not necessarily something that we've been, all organizations have been required to do. So what I would say is, it's best to, and we've got video up on me now here. It's best to really identify what deliverables your employees are working towards. So a lot of times that will come down from your strategic plans, down to your work plans, and then you've got deliverables that are associated with that. And so for each individual, there really should be some things that they're working towards, whether it be on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And so I would say at that point, it's really just identifying those through this process as you're talking about your telework agreement and how you'll be communicating with each other. If you aren't already meeting with your employees on that weekly basis, I do suggest that. I think weekly now is going to be really crucial for folks if you're not already meeting more often than that, or at least that often to check in, if nothing else. But have those conversations about what your expectations are regarding their productivity. So if it is KPIs, if it has to do more with project task orientation, if it has to do with being part of a collaborative team, and them sharing like what elements that they're working on that gets to say like the greater good, the bigger goal. So I would say those conversations should take place as well as when you're identifying how your employees will be working. You'll also be wanting to identify what will they be working on and what they can do as individuals and what they'll need to do as in a collaborative environment and what tools you'll need in order to have that be most efficient.
Great, thank you for that. Here's another good question. How do you handle wet signature needs or paper exchange that cannot be done electronically due to laws and policies? And this one really is personal for me because I have a document that has been needing a signature for months now, sitting on my desk, and I'm nowhere near it, but it still needs a signature. How do we do that?
Well, I can tell you what we do in our office. So there's a few things that we've done. Depending on the actual need of the signature, sometimes we will say if somebody's typed in and put a date into that space where the signature is needed, and then sent it, that's good. Another way we work it is we have done JPEGs of every single person's signature in our office, and we allow them to insert that as a JPEG onto that line. Or if you need to change it into a different type of format to get it into, say, whether it be a workbook or a document or whatever you're using. So those are the two things that we do internally, and it works for our organization. I can't speak to, there are e-sign type tools that are out there if your organization needs to look into a more, say, formalized situation. That could be something to look into as well.
Great. Here's a question that relates to marketing and, in some cases, convincing. How are you promoting telework to the community and to businesses?
Do you want to share how you're doing that with Move Minneapolis first, or do you want me to jump in there?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think it solves itself right now because we're all in an emergency situation. So maybe I'll talk more about how we can get the word out. I think social media right now is the way to go. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. We are, of course, a partner with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. We co-promote the materials that they send out by their social media and email lists. Again, it's kind of all hands on deck. So we're not doing a lot of editing in terms of deciding whose message we get out there. If it's related to telework, if it's related to safe working from home, I'll push it out. I'll push it out on my personal and on my business channel.
Yeah, we've been doing, so we have, we've created blogs and communications over the years, and what we're doing is we're in the process of having updated some of those and pushing those out to promote those and try to talk about. There's the usual telework promotions and convincing, and then there's the now we're in a different time promotion and convincing. So we're really trying to work with organizations, and a lot of times what we'll run into is, the trying to create a sense of fairness in your office is going to be really important at this point too. So having that conversation with every single employee regarding their eligibility is really crucial. Even if you think someone, like their duties don't allow them to telework, they should still have that conversation with that employee so that conversation can still happen. I think, again, it goes back to that open communication. And if employees don't necessarily know the situation of other employees that's come from the management down, then you're going to have your employees talking about what's going on amongst themselves. And we all know that sometimes that's very accurate information and sometimes it's not as accurate. So it's really best just to have management speaking to every single employee about what the expectations are and the reasoning behind maybe some decisions that are being made, and asking employees to understand that we are all in a very fluid situation right now. Things are changing on a day-to-day basis, and it's really necessary just to take that into consideration as employers as well as employees are grappling with how do we manage this currently. So.
Yeah, great question, great answer, great question. Wendy, do you have any recommendations on meetings that will be confrontational in nature? Are human cues and gestures still as effective via video?
I find that they are in other organizations that we work with and have implemented programs with. They certainly feel like video is, important. There is always an opportunity, especially if you have a multitude of dynamics taking place. There's always an opportunity to ask people if we can table something, and then you can get back to it individually or with a small group that might be, having the issue. I do feel like nonverbals are still, it's different a bit because you've got a screen there instead of people's situations. But again, this is where the over communicating might end up being a good thing, right? So there'll be times where, and this is experience that I've had, this is experience that we've heard from other employers, and this is some of the training that we do with employers that we talk about. It's important when you see something in the room that might be a little off, or you might see that somebody's reacting differently, to make sure you make note of that, and after the meeting, follow up with that person, directly. So that is something that I always have a little notepad next to me on my video meetings that's strictly for personnel, and it's one thing that we talk about in our trainings as well, is to just try to get ahead of that as quickly as you can. So as soon as a meeting ends, it's best to try to just say, hey, I saw you in a meeting today. I wasn't sure if there was something you misunderstood or something we can clarify on, or something that didn't sit well with you. And that's worked out pretty well. Tensions are high right now. Anxiety is going to be high with some of your employees. And so that's why I do feel like it's more important now, or it's important now more than ever, to really make sure that you're connecting with employees just on that true human level as well. Hey, I'm just reaching out to you. How are you doing? Just checking in, those type of things that you might need to do more than before.
What do you think you would do to coach a manager who does not have any natural empathy? There are those managers who manage by fiat, by email, by very brusque expectations. How can we help those individuals become a little more sensitized to the tenderness of their workforce?
Yeah, sometimes emotional intelligence is difficult to teach, but I think it's important for managers, especially if they're not in a position where they've managed their employees really across different platforms or preferences, and have been more like, this is the way I manage. I want you to manage up to me this way. I think it's important in this situation, especially if it's a new normal for folks, is that those managers just need to hear that all your employees are different, and they're going to want to be communicated to differently. And that is part of that checklist that we usually go through for the employee to say, like, I prefer to communicate via email. I prefer phone calls. I prefer video. I prefer being able to just chat with you once in a while. And that's part of that intake that you can do with your employees. And it's also the intake that the manager can do to let the employees know. I'm open for all of these ways you want to be communicated to, but I also really want you to respect these parameters, which might work best for that manager. So again, it's just that give and take of intake with each other and what will work best. If that is something that is still challenging after that situation, then it might be a scenario where you need to bring in, say, upper management and just ask about solutions that are available. So.
Okay, thank you. How about any recommendations on meetings? Oh, excuse me, we did that one. I would imagine that many companies are being rushed into telework due to the health crisis. What recommendations do you have to sustain the policy once the crisis has subsided? And from the Move Minneapolis standpoint, we are looking into the future, and we think that telework is a pretty fantastic, sustainable commute mode. Some companies may find that it works very, very well for them during this period of crisis. The crisis will end, and some companies will say, wow, that was an amazing experience. We were really well connected and people appreciated it. So how do we sustain this practice into the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say through the presentation, I touched on this maybe a bit more indirectly, but making sure that you're documenting what you're doing right now. So those elements of like eligibility, as far as like, who's able to full-time telework, and then forward, downward from there. But then also identifying your telework agreements. And your telework agreements, if you really are thinking this is going to be something that you want to sustain long-term, then some other elements to include in those have to do with like behaviors, expectations, things of that nature. And then as you're documenting your process for your plan and your process that you're communicating maybe to your managers, then the next step is to ask your managers to be documenting how things are going, challenges that they're running into, how they've overcome those challenges, the pros and cons that they're having on occasion. We do recommend that through this process that upper management has to be a big part of the conversation. Right now, some of them, for lack of a better word, may feel forced into this. And you might have upper management that previously wasn't on board with telework. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how that perspective will change as, say, some upper management folks who were making the decisions to maybe not have a flexible workplace like this might see that it is possible. We are functioning. There is some benefit to this. We are already hearing from companies that employees that have started full-time telework with the majority of their employees, how their employees are saying like, gosh, I feel so productive. I am able to start my work at say 7 or 8 or 9 or what have you, but they don't, their first 15, 20 minutes isn't spent about just like decompressing from the commute, right? And so I think letting employees know as directly or indirectly as you need to that how this situation is handled is really going to play a big effect on the type of selling you can do to upper management to see if it's something that can carry through past the emergency telework we're in right now.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question about distractions, and I think a lot of us are feeling this now, especially as we're ramping up and learning all these new apps so quickly. The proliferation of e-channels can be distracting and non-productive. Can you give us some thoughts about facilitating focus and productivity?
Sure. Yeah, especially with some of the ones that we talked about that like had to do with like chat or being able to ping people and things like that. There is certainly a way where you can let people know like I'm unavailable. Like you can change your status in almost all of these tools to say like I'm not necessarily available right now to just like engage. I need to focus in on my work. I would still say if you're able to keep a shared calendar with your company in the sense of like your fellow colleagues are able to see like when somebody is in a meeting or working on something, we can still utilize those tools to be able to block off time in your day, right? So you have time where you're blocked off and you're just like, I need to, and there will be, like I mentioned, some of it is just managing expectations with employees who are really like, they're, especially your social folks, right? Like they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, where's all my people? I love seeing my people, I miss my people. So they might be wanting to interact with you more, and that's great. We certainly don't wanna discourage that completely, but we do want to manage expectations so that people understand with the tools that are available on those social sides, you can certainly change your status on that and just ask people to be cognizant of that and look at that. Otherwise, look at calendars so that people can see like, oh, this time is blocked off, this person is unavailable at this time. So respect it as if those things are actually like somebody's door is shut. That's the way I have phrased it to employees. If we're utilizing these tools more and more. That's the best way that I've seen us use it internally, as well as recommendations that we've given to external clients.
Very good, thank you. Here's a question from me, and you've touched on this, but I need to hear it again for my own ears. What is a day in the life look like? And I mean, you wake up. Do you have a staff meeting with everybody on video? And do they say, here's what I'm going to work on? And at the end of the day, do you check in and do they fill out a form and send that to you? Here are the things that I A, worked on, B, completed, C, you need help with. How much just basic reporting do you do to one another, and is it written or verbal, or are your high performers given more leeway? How does that work?
So the way that we promote this scenario within managers is if you aren't asking all your employees to do something, unless we're talking about a modification because you've got some type of disciplinary action or something that you're working on with an employee. If you're not asking all of your employees to do something, you're better to ask no employees to do something. And it comes down to that scenario. So unless someone's been talked to, like, I'm concerned about X, Y, Z, so we're going to put these tools in place, and that's an individual solution. But as far as your teams are concerned, it's not to say that an organization couldn't have their employees fill out a form every day to do that. However, I would recommend if you're going to do that, that's something that every employee needs to be doing. And there are also some federal guidelines, depending on who your employees are, that say that by law, you're not able to treat teleworkers any differently than you are people who are not teleworking. Now, having said that, we are in a different state of mind, in reality. So that's, something to take into consideration. But, some like I've done this, some of those type of things like Asana, some of the, a lot of these free tools can actually have tasks associated with them where your manager might be a part of your group, and they can just go in, and as long as that person's updating their information, they can be like, oh, okay, so Wendy did all these things today. Great. And it looks like she's got all these things slated for tomorrow. So there are ways that you can go about it, but I would just stay consistent no matter what you choose.
Okay, great. Here's maybe one you don't even want to answer. Have you ever had to let anyone go because they could not function remotely?
The answer to that is no, but I will say that we also haven't allowed for people to telework who we thought were in a position where they wouldn't do well with telework. So we don't necessarily have the luxury right now to set up, say, that longer intake to just make sure that your employees have been trained, your managers have been trained. So in that case, I haven't heard of any employers that we've worked with who have run into that situation too that is specific to telework. But I certainly would say that if you're concerned that your employee is working in the office, then it's going to be amplified when they're not in the office. So I would say the best you can get ahead of that. So if you're in a situation now where you're like, gosh, as I mentioned in the presentation, there's the ideal candidate and for telework, and there's the ideal managers for telework. We're not in that position right now, so we have to make do the best we can. But get in front of those situations as much as you can with communications before things get too big, with some clear communications. It really can't be stressed enough that there's going to be some maybe hard conversations and some awkward conversations that have to happen. But at the end of the day, we're in a new scenario, and so we just have to really, at the end of the day, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about, like, the name of the game right now with telework is trust. Like, there just has to be a lot of trust involved, and then monitor things. And then there's also the scenario where there's the trust, and then there's the transition. So there's going to be a transition for some people. Some people are going to jump into remote telework really easy, and they're going to not skip a beat. Others are going to be on the other extreme. So we want to make sure as managers of people, and this is something we talk about in trainings too, is that you want to give people the benefit of the doubt until you have reason no longer to, because they could just be struggling. So.
Great answer. I do want to encourage people to go to the bottom of their screens to the Q&A button. If you have any burning questions, this is the place to get them out. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we answer all of your questions. I have another question from myself. We are lucky enough to have a tech firm that supports our company. And so when we have difficulty, we call them up or send them a message, they open a ticket, and usually within 24 hours, we have resolution. Some of the applications have easier tech support than others. What works really well? I mean, at this point in this situation, would you recommend that companies reach out and hire tech support if they don't have it? We know so many stories of the ops manager who runs the tech, or the person who runs the database is also really great at managing computer systems, so they do it. How should we do it?
I hate to answer a question with a question, but what are the needs, right? So if we're talking about a scenario where you need to like be mirroring somebody's screen, and you can do so like with some screen share tools that are happening, and so that way your employee could work through that, whoever your IT support is internally. Otherwise, you may need to go out and see if there's organizations that can assist you through the process. We haven't run into a lot of that need at this point to assist clients through. A lot of them have like their IT support already either in-house or they've got somebody contracted out to do that work. So I would say this right here, like that question is a great question where other people could maybe be pinging their answers, their comments in chat to let people know like what some good solutions are that have worked for them.
Yes, I'd love to see that. Go to the bottom and give us your chat. And if you have, at this point, if you have a wonderful IT company or consultant that you want to give a few props to, I don't think that we have any problem with that, no matter where you are. Here's a question from one of our attendees. What does the typical training process look like for managers and employees, even in this atypical situation?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of the aspects I talked about today. Usually we try to have trainings that are in person with a group. So it's usually something where we'll do trainings for groups of like 20, 30 people at a time. But they really just talk about a lot of the checklists that we've talked about. It goes over a lot of, say, like the policies and the agreements and things like that, that I believe are also resources that Move Minneapolis and commuter services would have available on their websites to kind of see like so we're walking them through more of the process of those best practice regarding agreements, policies, how you handle just internal communications, what tools are you going to be using, expectations, things of that nature. So with managers, it also has some of the nonverbal. How are you communicating? What's your social IQ with your emotional IQ with your staff? With direct employees, it has a lot more to do with like what are the expectations of you? What are your tools and tips that you're going to need as being a good employee? And we usually do those trainings when people have already identified that these are good employees to be teleworking. So we have that intake as a part of our manager training. So usually we do the manager training first, get your managers in place, and then the employees have the training so that they understand that the managers have already received the training that they need to move forward. So in this situation, it'd be a condensed version of that. A lot of that I shared, but there's more detail and resources that are available through all of our organizations that have been mentioned today.
Okay, great. I have a longer question here, so bear with me, everybody. I have read that every interruption sets you back 15 minutes. I don't have any time to think anymore because of constant interruptions in the office, and that has gotten even worse this week. How do I get my manager and coworkers to understand that just because I don't immediately respond, it doesn't mean I'm not working?
I think a really good way to manage that is if somebody emails you something, we recommend, and a practice that I preach and practice, is to ask people when their deadlines are. So if somebody sends me something and they want something, I'm like, okay, can you give me a need by date? When do you need this by specifically? Because I think a lot of people, once they hear that, are like, oh yeah, I guess I don't need this technically today. Maybe I could have it tomorrow by noon, or I could have it end of week, or whatever. I think that really helps a lot with the email requests that come in. Other things that we talk about is utilizing in your email subject lines some specific wording. So you might have something that says like a request, which means we're looking for approval. So you're like, okay, somebody needs approval on something. Something could be FYI, and then you just put it in there and you're like, that's not urgent. Another thing could be question, and then you're like, okay, I need to respond to that. Other thing could be action needed, and that's usually like exclamation point, action needed, right? So I think if you're utilizing your subject lines really well on, so this is email specifically, since we're looking at moving into remote work, that's really helpful. I think asking for deadlines is very helpful. I think sharing with people that you've got some other priorities that might need to happen first before you're able to get to their request, but you're working on it, and you can't maybe meet tomorrow by noon, but you could meet tomorrow by 4. Would that work for them? So I think that helps in that situation quite effectively.
Wonderful. One of my questions is, how do we create a sense of fun, playfulness, camaraderie, and support? Do we all decide that we're going to, show up and have a bagel together? How do we recognize birthdays? And all by video?
Right. Sure. Yeah, so there's still, things like snail mail. USPS is definitely still delivering. So it's like you could certainly, if you've got, there's organizations we work with that have birthday programs where typically they would have like a birthday cake of the month, or they would send around birthday cakes or things like that for an organization that has, multiple people that have multiple people with the same month of the birthday. But there's certainly things that I think we're going to find people are going to be sharing with us that are real creative ways that they've kept engagement going. I think there's always a great opportunity to start the conversation of like, what's the craziest thing that happened to you this week while you were teleworking, and just start like your staff meeting out with that and just ask if everybody's willing to share. I think some other things that have really added a lot of levity to some of the remote working scenarios I've been in is you'll see when people's animals are in the room, because like they're looking up, because like their cat's jumping on something, and it's always, it always kind of like lightens the mood where you're like, oh, is your cat jumping around? And like, yeah, I know, sorry, you're like, no, it's
yeah.
okay. So I think it's really valuable to just keep things real, to make sure that people don't have to feel stressed about this home situation. But animals play a big role. So it's like, we could talk about like people taking pictures of them teleworking with their animals and sharing that. I think would be kind of fun. I think there's a lot of different things that people could really, really work around that. But sure, my office, we have done, like in that picture I sent of like the, day in the life of Wendy, I had a bagel sent into the office for the group, and it's like, well, I'll have a cup of coffee with you guys. And that was me having, a cup of coffee with them at the end of the commute challenge. So there are certainly ways that you can celebrate things and just have maybe some lighthearted meetings and identify how you can work together on those type of things. For companies that do potlucks, which I know is maybe a big thing with hot dishes in Minnesota in the winter, but like that would be kind of fun too. It's like I know some people are already talking about like, oh, I'm doing a lot more meal prep because of shopping and not wanting to store as much as you need to, and so there's a lot more cooking happening right now. And so it could be like sharing recipes that have been really great for the work day, so that you're not spending an hour at lunch, but you didn't bag your lunch to bring to work. You know what I mean? So that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
To cook and eat. So those type of things I've heard people already talking about too. Like, let's have Wednesday be one of the ones I heard was an office came up with. Let's have Wednesday be the we make the meal that we grew up eating and we share it on screen. So I think those are just kind of fun little things. If that's what you're going for with that question.
Yes, wonderful. We have a comment. We're trying a virtual lunch today over Microsoft Teams. We had planned a sandwich for today's someone going away party. We'll see how that goes. Well, we wish you well.
Yeah, we'd love to hear how it goes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I am going to wrap this up. We're at time, and I really want to thank you, Wendy, and thank our audience members. We're truly grateful for your commitment to a healthy community, all of you. And this isn't easy, and we will get through it. And yes, we will be posting the whole recording of the webinar to moveminneapolis.org. Everything's spelled out, M-O-V-E, and belong Minneapolis. So stay safe, everyone. Thank you again, Wendy, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.